So for today's class, as Kirsten said, we are going to make biscuits and grits, and then I'm going to show a shrimp topping. So a very common way of eating grits in the South is shrimp and grits. But as I mentioned in my recipe, that you can totally have the topping for grits without the shrimp. The sauce that we'll be making would go very well with the grits by itself. You can even add like sausages or chicken to it, or any other vegetarian protein that you would like. Or you can just have grits with, like eggs or jam and butter. There are a lot of different ways you could have it. Has anyone here made biscuits or have had shrimp or shrimp and grits before? All right. Okay, so we'll get started with the recipes, and I'll talk more about what grits really are, like how they're, like where they come from, and the biscuits a little bit more. Oh, sorry, I just did something. Can everyone still see me on the big screen? Okay, all right. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit more about them while I stir the grits later for 20 minutes. So we'll go ahead and get started with the biscuits first, and then we'll go into the grits and then the shrimp. So if you haven't preheated your oven yet for the biscuits, now is a good time to do it. So you're going to preheat it to 425 Fahrenheit. Okay, let me grab actually, I'm going to keep my butter in there in the freezer. And if you have not placed your butter in the freezer, this is a good time to do it. It's helpful to grate it if you're using the grating method to freeze your butter for like 10 to 15 minutes. Right? Feel free to put your questions into the chat or just raise your hands, and Kirsten and Tiffany will help me monitor those. And let me know if you have trouble seeing anything that I'm doing or hearing. I tend to start to mumble as I keep on talking. So just let me know if I start mumbling. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is mix our dry ingredients together. So Sahana, I'll keep an eye on you. Thanks for keeping your camera on so we can kind of cook along the same speed. And I'm glad you're making this with me. It's always fun when we have anyone cooking along. Okay, so we're gonna add 2 cups of flour. Should probably have leveled that off, but that's okay. And then we're gonna add in 1 tablespoon of baking powder.
Maybe you can help me with this, Quynh, but really what's the difference between baking powder and baking soda?
I really should look this up because I get this question all the time and we always have to Google it. I'm not quite sure what the differences are between them. I know they both are rising agents, like it helps whatever you're baking rise, but I think it has like a different chemical reaction with whatever you're baking. So if you want to look that up and educate us, go for it. Okay, so I just added baking powder. Now I'm gonna add in sugar. Tablespoon of sugar. I would say if you don't want to use sugar, you can definitely leave it out. 1 teaspoon of salt. And I use raw sugar. That's what I have readily available in my kitchen right now. Okay. Then we're just gonna mix all of that together. I'm using a fork, but you can definitely use a spoon as well. And then we're gonna leave that aside. I'm gonna move on to our butter. Sahana, are you going to use the grated butter method or are you going to like cut them?
I can do either. If you recommend grating, I'll do grating.
I highly recommend grating. So I'm glad you have a grater. You can grate along.
Yeah.
So my butter. All right. So it's almost a stick of butter. It's 6 tablespoons. But I think if you add more butter, it's okay. Life is always okay with extra butter. You can use unsalted or salted butter. So what I've learned from this recipe, and well, it's not my recipe, I found it online after really wanting to learn how to make biscuits from scratch and feeling very intimidated to make biscuits from scratch and failing. I found this recipe that used the grated method, and it makes it so much easier to mix the butter in with the flour evenly. And it helps distribute the butter flakes in the dough as well. So when you bake it, it adds like really nice flavor and texture to the biscuit. So I'm using a grater and I'm using this side of it. So it's like the 3rd largest side of the grater. And it definitely helps to freeze your butter just to make it really nice and hard. And if you've never grated butter before, it's actually really fun. And it's really pretty because this is what it looks like. It's like very beautiful little ribbons.
It looks like the stuff you get when you go to a fancy restaurant.
Yeah, so you can grate butter and set it out and serve it at your next dinner party with your bread and rolls.
So now that you've learned to make biscuits, but what is your favorite place to buy biscuits? Like what restaurant?
Actually, I've never really purchased biscuits at restaurants. Where do you have a favorite place? You mentioned Hardee's earlier, Chris.
Yeah, if you have never gone to Hardee's before, you should definitely try their biscuits and gravy that they sell in the morning. It's one of my favorite things to get at any restaurant, fast food or otherwise.
Do they sell them all day or just like in the morning?
I think they only serve them in the morning.
It is biscuits are typically more of a breakfast dish.
Yeah.
Or if it's like a side for other dishes that you can have for lunch or.
And also here in Charlottesville, if you go to the Mitchie Tavern, those are the best biscuits I've ever had.
Ooh.
So I definitely recommend those as well.
So I grew up in Connecticut after my family moved to the United States from Vietnam. And I don't really remember like seeing biscuits a lot unless you go to like specifically a Southern restaurant. So I didn't really know it was like a thing that a lot of people eat. I mean, I've seen it and have had it a few times in Connecticut, and I would see it like the Pillsbury, the Pillsbury style, like you can just, pop open the can and then just bake it. But I didn't know too many people who actually made biscuits from scratch. And then when I came to Charlottesville for school at UVA as an undergrad, I would see like biscuits in the dining hall all the time. I was like, ooh, what is this delicious Southern treat? Okay. I want to show you what the plate of grated butter looks like. I think it's so pretty. Check that out. Isn't it so cool?
It kind of looks like the fur of a poodle.
It does. How it like curls together. Okay, so when we have our grated butter, we are just gonna add it into a bowl of flour. I prefer to use a fork instead of a wooden spoon or a spoon at all, because I find it easier to like fluff the butter in with the flour. Because what you want ultimately is to have little specks of butter within your flour. You don't want it to be like all mushed up with your flour, if that makes sense. Because you want to keep pieces of it that will help it during the baking process. If it's all mushed up with the flour, then it kind of just like runs in with the rest of the dough when you're baking it, and it's not as like buttery and it won't rise as much. So I just mix it in like this. I'm just like fluffing it. If you have like big clumps, just kind of like poke at it with your fork and break it up. So what you want is kind of like a coarse texture, like cornmeal. So. Mix it. You don't want to mix it too much. This can be a tricky dish to make if it's really, really hot in your kitchen, because the butter will just melt quickly and you don't want it to melt until it hits the oven. Okay, so this is what mine looks like. So it's kind of like crumbly looking. How's yours looking, Sahana?
It's getting there. I still have to get it to the crumbliness, but it's on its way. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, just like mine, some of mine clumped together. So just like break up the little bits. Butter. Had a little mustard jar that just flew out of my refrigerator. So biscuits it's like a very common dish in the South, and then now it's very popular in the rest of the country, and it's been around for a really long time. I read that it's definitely been in the US, in like part of US cuisine since the Revolutionary War. But back in the days, baking powder and baking soda didn't exist yet. So to make it rise, or to help the biscuits rise, they would have to like beat the dough to add air to it. But even then it couldn't get like as flaky and have like that layer texture that you can make now with biscuits with the help of baking powder. So biscuits back in the days were just like not as thick, and it's like harder texture. Okay. So to this dough, we're gonna add 3/4 cups of milk.
Any specific type of milk or just whatever you prefer?
Whatever you prefer. Some people even make this without milk. You know, like biscuits is just one of those like cheap food that anyone could make. So when times get tough, you know, in US history in the South, people would make this with just water.
So I'm making the whole thing vegan. Would that change any of the proportions? I'm using almond milk and vegan butter.
I think it should be fine.
Okay.
I've never made this with vegan butter and like a non-dairy milk, but it should be okay. Right, then we're just gonna stir that together. Yeah, because the regular butter and milk will just add like a creamy flavor to the biscuits. The baking powder is what will really help it rise. So I didn't explain like the use of the butter in this too well earlier, like for why you don't want it to be like completely mushed in with the dough. Is as you'll see like how we'll make it later. We're gonna actually create layers in the dough. So having little pieces of butter throughout the dough will help it like the layers be more defined and kind of like almost like lightly frying each layer with the butter. So my dough, it's looking a little bit too dry. So I'm gonna add some more milk in. And just, if your dough is also looking dry, just add like a splash in at a time. So it should come together. Now I'm just gonna really get in here. So once it starts to clump together like this, you can dump it onto a floured surface to continue combining it. So I'm just gonna do it on this cutting board to lightly flour your working surface to prevent it from sticking. And then work this a little bit more with my hand. So you'll still see like loose pieces, and that's okay because we're gonna work it together some more. But if your dough looks really loose, just add a little bit more milk or water, cold water and cold milk. But yeah, that's the other key thing. When making biscuits, you want to use cold, whatever cold liquid you're using, and cold butter. It's almost like making a pie crust. We have to use like ice water and cold butter. So just like gently knead it so it comes together. So as you can see, it's like not as much loose dough anymore. Just press it in. And my dough isn't sticky either. So if yours is sticky, just like sprinkle a bit more flour in. All right. So this is what it should look like. Not shiny, but it's like sticking together. That looks great. Awesome. So now we're going to start creating layers. So what you're going to do, what I also like about this recipe is you don't need to use a rolling pin. Your hand is going to do all the work. So just flatten it out a little bit. And then you're going to fold it over. Flatten it. Rotate it. Fold it in half again. Flatten it out. So that's 2 times. We're going to do this for 6 times. 2, 3. So every time you fold it in half, flatten it, just rotate it, and do the same again. So if you ever made puff pastry from scratch, this is a similar method, like laminating the dough. Definitely a lot easier though, because you don't have to like refrigerate the dough as you continue. But this is what creates those beautiful fluffy layers we're gonna see later. Okay, so I think that was 6. Talking and counting is very hard to do at the same time. Okay, so when you've done it for 6 folds, then we're gonna flatten it. So you're gonna flatten this down with your hand until it's about 1 inch thick. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because as we cut this, there's gonna be like random pieces, extra pieces that we're just gonna combine together and make more biscuits. That's about 1 inch. Something I love about this recipe, it doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to be like exactly 1 inch. It'll be okay. All right, so now I'm gonna start cutting out my biscuit. I'm using the lid from a mason jar. If you have a biscuit cutter, you can use that. A cup would work as well too, but I wouldn't recommend a cup because sometimes you might have to like pop it out a little, and that might be harder to do with a cup. If you don't have any of those tools, you can just make square biscuits and just cut them in squares. So if you are using a biscuit cutter or a mason jar lid, just dunk it into your flour, just the flour so it won't stick to the dough. So mine looks like that. I'm gonna start cutting it. So let's press it down. What tool are you using to cut your biscuits, Sahana?
I'm gonna go in with a knife and snake square ones.
Perfect. Okay, so that's my little biscuit. You can make them different sizes too. I like this size. But if you look, I'm not sure if you can see through the camera, you can kind of see the layers already. And that's what you want. It's gonna puff up. It's gonna be so good. I can't wait. Okay.
It's exactly like the Pillsbury ones.
I see the layers in mine. I don't know if it's picking up.
I feel like aren't the Pillsbury ones like a little bit thicker?
I can't remember now.
You can get at least 6. These guys. When you put them on your baking sheet, they don't spread very much, so you just need to give them like 1 inch between each of them. So with your extra dough, like I have here, I can't really make more. Just mush them together. Just combine them again. And then flatten it out. Until you use up all of your dough. But because we want to keep the cold butter, prevent the cold butter from melting, I would recommend working fast. Like this isn't a dish where you can like have a cup of tea and take your time with it. Because as we're working, as I'm using my hand to press down on the dough, it's adding heat to it. So it's already slowly melting the butter a little bit. But if it seems like your dough is starting to get like really soft, that's a sign that the butter is really melting. And you can just stick your dough in the fridge for like 10 to 15 minutes and take it out and work on it again. All right. Maybe I'll make a tiny little biscuit. There we go.
It can be one for your dog.
That's exactly what I was thinking. You might be able to see him in the corner. He's that little fluff ball. Right there, making sure I don't mess up. Okay, I'm gonna transfer this
Favorite ways to eat biscuits. I know some people like biscuits and gravy. Others like them with sausage or bacon or egg.
Mm-hmm.
I personally am a biscuits and gravy person, but I can take a sausage and egg biscuit sometimes.
I love them with just butter and jam. That's really good. Yeah, but biscuits and gravy, that's where it's at. All right. So that's it for our biscuits. We're gonna bake them for, let's see, 12 minutes. But it might be different depending on every oven's temperature, although you set it to 425, might not actually be 425, so just keep an eye. Cool.
I know that mine definitely takes longer than the required amount of time. My oven usually does. So
Yeah, so yeah, just keep an eye on it, and what you want it to look like is just nice and golden. And then you can even add, you can brush some melted butter over it to give like a more golden flavor and more buttery flavor, but definitely not required. Okay, so now I'll move on to the shrimp and grits. First, I'm gonna just prep the vegetables for the shrimp. So for that, we're gonna use green bell pepper, onion, and 2 cloves of garlic. And we're also gonna chop up thinly slice some scallions or green onions to be a topping at the end. All right. So for those of you who've had biscuits already, what are some of your favorite ways to eat biscuit?
Honey.
Honey? Nice. How about some others? Yeah, jam and butter. You know, just in case there's not enough butter in the biscuits, let's like slather more butter on top of it. Okay, so for the bell peppers, we're just gonna dice them, and they're gonna be about that size. Let me change my camera angle. There you go. That's better, right? You can, if you're tired of hearing me talk or looking at me chopping, you can just stare at how cute Harry is. He might jump over here in a little bit, hoping that I'll drop something and he can eat it.
So in addition to what you're making today, do you have any other like Southern dishes you really like?
I really like pulled pork or pulled chicken, and fried chicken, Southern fried chicken. Making fried chicken, that's one of my dream dishes to learn how to make well. I've yet to achieve that dream, maybe someday. I should have done that cooking class where we made Southern fried chicken.
It's so time consuming and messy.
Yeah, and it's like, I love cooking, obviously. If anyone here knows me well, knows I love cooking, but I really don't like frying things in my house because it just like makes it smell so much. And then during the summers when I'll do a lot of like more deep frying dishes, but then it'll be too hot outside. Yeah, so it's just easier, just go and buy fried chicken. Okay. So I'm only gonna do kind of like a half portion. So I'm not gonna use all of my pepper. And I'll just use half an onion. So who here have had grits before again? I forgot. Hisham, did you say you had grits before, or was that biscuits that you've had?
Biscuits. Mostly biscuits, but maybe I got grits with some people.
Okay. Grits are very common. Like you can have it as like a side dish in a lot of restaurants.
Yep, I like them.
What about you, Caroline? Have you had grits before?
I have, but it was plain and simple, you know, the quick grits and, you know, and I wasn't impressed. That's why I'm watching this to improve on it.
Kirsten and I were talking about like grits in general at the beginning and how like they can be really mushy. So if you're not a fan of like that mushy texture of food, then grits may not be your favorite thing. But I find out with instant grits, they tend to be even like mushier. Whereas like stone ground grits, it's what I highly recommend if you're making this at home. It has like a much nicer texture to it. It's gritty. And it's, you know, it takes a little bit more time, but it's worth it. Your grits will still come out really nice and creamy. It's better.
Kind of like the same concept with doing oatmeal too.
Mm-hmm. So I never made grits until maybe like 2-3 years ago. That's when I started seeing like more shrimp and grits on the menu at restaurants around Charlottesville, and I thought it was like the best Southern food ever, and I really wanted to learn how to make them, and I actually learned how to make the grits in the style that we're making it today from my now father-in-law. We were at the beach and we wanted to learn how to make it, and he taught us. And it's so easy. It's just time consuming, a little bit time consuming, not too time consuming, because you have to like stand there and constantly stir the grits. Get really nice and creamy. And he adds in 2 sticks of butter in the grits, which is a lot for me, but it makes it so good. We're only using 1 stick of butter.
There's no such thing as too much butter in Southern food.
That's exactly what he said. So when I was practicing this dish earlier, I wasn't sure if like the grits were cooked yet. That was something I've had trouble with a lot at the beginning of learning how to make this, because it has that gritty texture. But what is like uncooked gritty versus like it's cooked, it's just is naturally gritty. So I sent him like a video of the pot with the grits, and he was like, I think you need more butter in there. Okay. That to the side. And I might as well just chop the green onion. And you can use the white and green part. I'm just going to cut some green to just show you how to garnish it later. So the shrimp topping recipe that I wrote for this class, it's not the traditional way. It varies a little bit. Like in South Carolina, I think they just use like some seasoning and butter and oil to make the shrimp topping, and maybe some tomatoes. In New Orleans, it's usually with Cajun seasoning and maybe some other vegetables in there. But after trying a lot of different recipes, I found that I really like this combination. And I love chipotle pepper, so I personally add that in, but I don't think that's very common in a lot of Southern shrimp and grits recipe. All right, let's get cooking. So this can be a pretty quick weekday meal with the shrimp topping that adds like a really nice seasoning to it. You can also make this for like lunch and dinner. Breakfast. It's actually a pretty common breakfast dish. And when I was reading up on like the history of shrimp and grits, a lot of people wrote about breakfast shrimp, where they would have this for breakfast a lot in the Low Country or like South Carolina, around like the Charleston area. And over time, it just gotten really popular at restaurants, and you start seeing it a lot more menus, whereas before, shrimp and grits was just something that you make at home that's like quick and easy to put together for yourself or your family. It wasn't something that you would get at restaurants like you can now. And now it's gotten like really fancy with like a lot of like, I've seen it with like a cilantro oil or like pesto. Whereas like the origins of biscuits and shrimp and grits is just simple comfort everyday food that's affordable for everyone. But I'll tell you more about grits in a bit. And actually in the 10 to 15 minutes when I'm stirring the grits. So my stove is a little bit slow to heat up, so I'm gonna start to heat up my liquid for the grits as well. So I'm having the recipe, which would serve about 2 people. So the first step is to just heat up milk and water. So 1 cup of milk. I'm using 1 cup of milk and 2 cups of water. And since I'm not quite making the grits yet, I'm just gonna keep it on a low temperature just to like slowly heat it up. You definitely don't want it boiling, because if you've ever heat up milk, it overboils really easily. It happens to me almost every single time I heat up milk on the stove. So having you all looking at me right now will help me keep an eye on it and not embarrass myself on camera. Okay, so this is heated up. So I'm going to add a little bit of oil. Ooh, the biscuits. All right, let's check them out. Mine definitely needs more time. So I'm going to give it 3 more minutes. Are your biscuits done yet, Sahana?
Needed another couple of minutes and they're almost done with the other couple of minutes. So I'll have to see now.
Okay. I can't wait to see how yours come out with the vegan butter. And what kind of milk did you end up using?
I used almond milk.
Nice. Okay, so to the pan, I'm going to add the onions and the bell pepper. And we're just going to saute them until the onion is translucent and the vegetables have softened, which will take about 3 minutes. So while that is cooking, let me talk a little bit about the grits that I'll be using today. So this is my favorite brand, and this is the one that I'll be using. And you can usually find them at Foods of All Nations in Charlottesville. If not, Amazon definitely carries them, but I find like more specialty food store carries the Promato brand. One that you can find at a lot of grocery stores is the House Altry brand, what it looks like. So you want to pick stone ground. I think old-fashioned may work too. I haven't cooked with old-fashioned grits. I've only used stone ground. And what stone ground means is, it's ground with a stone, and it has a more coarse texture. Instant grits tend, because it needs to cook faster, it tends to have a finer texture to it than stone ground. And you can use yellow or white grits. It just means like it's either made with yellow corn or white corn. Either is fine.
Have you tried cheese grits before?
Yes, so good. Okay. Let me try and do this without pouring grits all over my laptop. So that's what stone ground looks like. Okay. My I'm gonna give mine like another 2 minutes. I just realized since we didn't brush butter on it, it's not gonna have that beautiful golden yellow color that you would get from brushed butter.
I just pulled it out and added, like, brushed it with some butter and put it back in to try and.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, just now. Let's see.
Okay, I'm gonna add garlic. Make that for a little bit.
Smelling good.
Thank you. Hopefully you can smell it. Okay, I'm gonna add a teaspoon of Cajun seasoning. And then I'm going to add in our fire roasted diced canned tomato. You can use other like crushed tomatoes too, that's fine, or you can use fresh tomato with a little bit of liquid. Okay. So I'm gonna Okay, so once you add in your canned tomato, you can just let it simmer for about 15 minutes. Cover with a lid. So I would not add salt at this point because depending on your the brand that you're using for Cajun seasoning, it may have like varying levels of salt in it, so you may not even need salt later. So I always like to add it at the end and just add a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the grits now. Heat this up, keeping a close eye on it. You guys can see the pot too, so if I turn around and it's like boiling, let me know. Okay, I'm gonna use 1 cup. So my father-in-law was telling me that growing up, he ate a lot of grits, and he would just, have it plain, maybe with just like some sugar or with just butter, or adding a fried egg on top. And that was what he had for a lot of breakfast growing up in the South. Okay. So you don't want your liquid to come to a rolling boil. That means it's like bubbling a lot. You just want it to be like lightly bubbling. So I keep mine at medium heat, which is like a 5 on my stove. All right, I need to remember that the timer went off. All right, these are looking much better. This is when I wish we were at the IC kitchen and I have like the massive island to work with. I'll show you what the biscuits look like.
You can see how much they've risen from here.
Oh, you can? See, but they're so big and fluffy. I wish I could just give you all some biscuits right now. But let me see on a surface. I'm trying to pick the prettiest one to show you up close. They're still hot. You can see all those layers in there, and that's from the folding method. It smells really good. I can't wait to eat it. So a reason for why I don't brush it with butter is because I eat it with so much butter already, and my husband does the same, like slices of butter in it. So I figure it'd be good to like minimize butter in other ways that I can. Okay, so my milk. Almost boiling. Give that another second. I feel like milk, it can just be like very like tempered and then like suddenly boiling and overflowing in a matter of like seconds.
Got my ears too.
Oh, I can see the layers.
Yeah, I think it's clearer on this side. I don't know. Make out.
That looks really good.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Ew. When are you gonna have yours with, Sahana?
It's a good question. I'm definitely gonna try it with honey and with jam. Since I mentioned that.
I think it's so good with like a sweetened flavor. Okay, so my milk and water is at a soft, very soft boil. I'm gonna add my grits in now. And you wanna add a little at a time while stirring. So by adding a little bit at a time and stirring, you're preventing your grits from clumping together while they're cooking. And it'll help give it a nice creamy texture at the end too. So it may seem like a lot of liquid for just a cup of grits, but the grits they'll like absorb the liquid and they're really dry, so they need a lot of liquid. Okay, let's see. Oh, the Palmetto brand is so much better than the House Audrey brand. So I highly recommend, if you can get your hands on that, get that.
Flavor wise or texture wise?
Texture wise. Yeah. The House All Tree was the brand that I tested out earlier this week. And it has like a more gritty texture than the Pomado brand. And I'd like it to be less gritty and more creamy. It seems to be cooking faster too. Oh, I just realized it's 10 o'clock. I mean, it's 3 o'clock. I'm so sorry. It's past 3 o'clock. So pretty much, I think the grits is done. So it looks like that. Let me spoon it up so you can see what the texture is like. So then what you're gonna do is just let it sit off the stove for about 5 more minutes, and that will help it thicken up some more. And this topping is also about done. So to that, I'm just gonna add my shrimp. And I just realized I forgot to add my chipotle pepper, but that's okay. I'm gonna add some red pepper flakes. So if you like it really spicy, you can add cayenne pepper or red pepper flakes into this. What I like about the chipotle pepper in the adobo sauce is it adds spiciness to the sauce, but it also adds like a nice light smoky flavor too. Okay.
Also, if anybody wants it, another popular corn-based food in the South are hush puppies. It's essentially just like cornmeal that's deep fried, but it's very good. So if you ever get an opportunity to eat hush puppies, take it.
Well, when we're back in person and we can have our annual bluegrass picnics again in our backyard in April, we always get hush puppies. I personally love them. Tanya, my boss, is like okay about them. I was like, we have to get hush puppies for the picnic every year. So I convince her every year to let us order it. Because you're right, it is very unique to like Southern food, and not a lot of people had it. It's so good.
When I was little, my sister and I have an older sister who's 6 years older than me. So when she got her car, we would go together to the fast food chain Long John Silver's. Get hush puppies. We didn't like fish. We would just get the hush puppies.
What do you eat hush puppies with? Is there like a dipping sauce that you like with it?
I normally don't, but I do. But when I think about it, it's usually found at like fish-themed restaurants for some reason. Like if you've been to Captain D's or Long John Silver's, they both have hush puppies. I imagine you could probably eat it with something. Maybe like, I think my uncle eats it with ketchup. But my uncle could just be weird.
I feel like a lot of fried food you have with ketchup. I think you can find them in like barbecue restaurants too, like where we cater our food for the bluegrass picnic is from a barbecue restaurant, and they serve it with like a spicy maple syrup sauce. So
Sounds really good.
here's to hoping that next April we'll all get to try out hush puppies. Okay, so this is about done. So this is what it looks like. Can you guys kind of see it? Sorry, the view is not great. If you like it to be more like liquidy, you can definitely add a little bit of water to it, or you can continue to let the sauce simmer. I feel like sauces like this, the more time you give it, it's not gonna hurt it. You definitely don't need to let it simmer for more than 15 minutes. Since we're short on time, I just like added the shrimp and cooked them quickly, but you can let the shrimp cook in the sauce at a lower heat for about like 10 to 15 minutes. All right, so let me plate this real quick. You can see the final dish. So if you have the grits with just anything else, like maple syrup is another great way to have it sweetened, and jam. Savory cheese, you can stir in some like cheddar cheese in this, that would be delicious. Add a fried egg, I think I've mentioned that, or like sausage crumbles, bacon. It goes on and on. I mean, it's like a pretty bland-ish base, kind of like rice or porridge. So it's very versatile in what you can serve it with. This on top. I love it with shrimp and with this. Sometimes I'll add andouille sausage to this as well. And that's also really good together with the shrimp. And then our green scallion.
I could see that sauce on like rice or wheat berries or any other kind of grain as well too.
Yeah, anything, or just like with bread.
Mhm, right.
Go with the biscuits too.
Yeah.
I love the sauce with it.
Mhm.
This is the final dish. I wish I can like FedEx this somehow through the screen and that you all could try it. But yeah, so I hope you'll try to make grits. I think it's a very, coming from East Asia and like from Vietnam in particular, I've never seen something like grits in Vietnam. Like I didn't even know what grits was for a really long time. I mean, like I knew of the dish, but I didn't know it was from dried corn or like how it was prepared. I just find it to be a very special Southern dish to me. So I wanted to share it with everyone, and then with our biscuits as well. I can't wait to dig into this, and I hope you all try it and love it.
Thank you.